Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a tutor at Sky Academy. We are looking at the topic of financial maths within the Year 11 standard course. And we're looking at interest and depreciation, which comes under MSS2. So in our previous two videos, we had a look at simple interest and loan repayments. And now we're going to have a look at simple interest graphs and how to graph simple interest over a period of time. So here in the blue box is the steps to constructing a simple interest graph. So firstly, you make a table of values for I and N. So N would be your x-axis, the horizontal axis, and I, or the interest earned, would be the y-axis, which is the vertical axis. And so when you're drawing your table of values, instead of putting X and Y in these two boxes at the front, you're going to substitute for N and I. So N will go on top and you'll write the number of years in there. So say it was over 3 years, you'd have your first year, which is 0, 1, 2, and 3 years. So that's step 1. Step 2 is to draw a number plane. So when you're drawing a number plane for simple interest graphs, you will only use this top quadrant here. So this is what a normal number plane looks like, and you have y values and x values, and we will only use this top first quadrant here. And that's because we will have positive values along this axis and positive values along this axis. So this quadrant here is the only one where every value is positive. If we were to use this second quadrant, you would have negative values along this axis here. And so you can't have negative time. And so that's why we can only use this top quadrant. So when you're drawing a simple interest graph, you only have to draw two axes. You only have to draw your one y-axis and one x. So our y is our interest and our x is our time period n. So once you've drawn your number plane in this top quadrant here, you can then join the points to make a straight line. So let's have a go at following these steps, getting a table of values, drawing a number plane, and making a straight line to construct a simple interest graph. So here it says, create a simple interest graph showing interest earned over 4 years when $1,000 is invested at 6% per annum. So firstly, we've got to find our equation. So our equation is our simple interest, where I equals PRN. And we are going to solve for our interest. But you need to remember that the interest is the y-axis, and our n, our number of years, is going to be the x. When you're doing simple interest graphs, your interest is your y and your number of years is your n, or your x. And so when we are creating our equation of our simple interest graph line, you need to keep your I and your n as letters and sub the other two for what the question says. Because when you're doing y equals mx plus b, which is the straight line, equation of a straight line, you only sub for m, which is your gradient. You find your gradient and you write it in there, so it could be 3.4. And you find your y-intercept, which is b, which could be 7. But you leave your x and your y as your x and your y. You don't sub for those. And so we are going to leave our I and our N as our I and our N, but we can sub for the rest. So our P is our principal, which is $1,000, and it's going to be times 6%, which is just 0.06. And we're going to times it by our N. We aren't going to sub for I or N. So now let's get our formula. Interest is going to equal 1,000 times 6% times N. And that's just going to equal 60N, because 1,000 times 6% just gives us 60. So now this is our formula that we can use to create our table of values. So if you remember, when you calculate your table of values, the N goes on top and the I goes on the bottom. Now, when you're doing a table of values for y equals mx plus b, you just make up your random values for x. You can choose unless they specify. And in this question, they have specified. So we can't make up our values for n. They have asked for the interest to be over a period of 4 years. So we have to make our time period n go over 4 years. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now we can sub our n values into our equation. So 60 times 0 is going to give us 60. 60 times 1, whoops, this is going to give us 0, sorry. 60 times 1 will give us 60. 60 times 2, 120. 60 times 3, 180. And then 240 for 60 times 4. So once you've done that, you can now draw your number plane. And remember, we're just going to use that top quadrant. And on the y-axis is going to be our interest earned. And on our x-axis is going to be the time period, which is n. I might actually do the n a little bit down here. So now we can put our n, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And our interest earned has to go up to 240. So I'm just going to put 300 here. And then 200 and then 100. And so now we can graph. So that would be 250 and 150 and 50. So at 0, we had 0. So we'll pop a point there. At 1, we had 60, so it'll just be above 50, so it could be about there. At 2, we had 120, so it'll be just above 100. So maybe there. At 3, we had 180, which would be just before 200, so there. And finally for 4, we had 240, which would be just under 250, so about there. My graph is not going to be very accurate because I did just freehand it. But if you have grid paper, it will be easier to mark out a accurate spacing between each scale of 300, 200, and 100. But your graph should look a little something like this. And you draw in a line of best fit where you have an equal number of dots above and below the line. So we had 2 above and 2 below, and then 1 on the line. You might be able to get them all on the line, which would be perfect. If not, just try for an equal number above and below. But that's how you draw a simple interest graph. First, you get a table of values by finding an equation. Then you draw your number plane, put your points on your number plane and connect them with a straight line. And just remember when you're creating your equation to leave I and N as I and N and sub for the other two values of P and R.